thank you all for coming out tonight. We're very excited to have you. This is truly a special event, and we're just very, very blessed. Blessed to hear such beautiful poetry. So thank you for celebrating this with us tonight. So what we will do, because of time constraints, I won't have the indulgence to be able to delve into all the bios of these outstanding laureates, and I assure you they are truly outstanding. So I welcome you to peruse through the program. Instead, what I'll do tonight is entertain you with some little-known fact, right, a fun dervish point about each poet. So without further ado, we're going to begin tonight's evening with Sadie Sparks, the Olympia City Poet Laureate. Yeah. So Sadie's going to read a poem to kick things off. And a little known fact about Sadie is she is very passionate about veganism.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I have a setup. So this is called Panic Button, and I wrote it yesterday. I am in a laboratory creating flowers for you. First we have magnolias. Second we have dandelions. Third we have violets. Fourth we have irises. Fifth we have clovers. And sixth we have sunflowers. And I am lacing them around each other, interlacing petals around a silver panic button. Your panic button is covered in flowers, and I love you, and we are dancing outside. Anytime you feel the heart beginning to shake, the hands beginning to race, know that the panic button is right here, is a garden, is alive and pulsing, and I love you. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sadie. So our first poet laureate is Sam Green. Not everyone may know that Sam can recite The Raven by heart, because when he was in the 6th grade, he read the complete works of Edgar Allan Poe as the teacher had put his desk behind 3 tall filing cabinets in the back of that room to keep him from engaging too ardently in the class. So take it away, Sam. Thank you.
And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain. There we go. True story, though. All right. I got into the habit of reading other poets when I was laureate to start readings with, so I'd like to do that tonight. 2 poets. One, Kimon Lieberman. Kimon was a precocious junior in high school when I first met her. She later earned her PhD at Berkeley, taught at Lakeside High School for many years, and alas, died too young of stomach cancer at the age of 37. This is from her second book. After 10 years in America, my grandmother decides to celebrate Tet. Because her life had already ended once, my grandmother bought 3 crabs fish sauce on sale by the supermarket cartful, stuffed her purse with glossy coupons for rice, beef, bok choy, eggs. Because her new clock barreled forward from January, she grabbed free calendars and Little Saigon, rouged her walls with pageant queens and plastic pink azaleas against fake cerulean skies, counted down the tiny moon days, waxing and waning. Because her new year arrived without fanfare, she fashioned a fire pot from a steel trash can, wrapped bricks of sticky rice and banana leaf, boiled them green. Because her grandchildren wrinkled noses at mung bean and pork, she dipped their soy in sugar, filled their teacups with warm milk. Because her own fate remained elusive, she lit tabletop incense and stacked a dozen satsumas and persimmons in the ancestors' bowl to fend off regret, just in case a few souls wandered through, as once she did, too far from home to feast, but hungry all the same. Second is Rachel Rose. Rachel is a citizen of Canada and of the United States. This particular book won the Poet Laureate Award in Canada for the best book by a woman in Canada for that year, and at the same time won the Audre Lorde Award in the United States for the best book of poetry by a gay woman in the United States. She is an amazing young woman. When I first met her, she was an 8th grader. Now she's been the Poet Laureate of Vancouver, and she's wicked smart, as they say. Waiting for the biopsy results. We don't talk about it. We put it out of mind. It clings like mist, like cobweb to our skin. When I wake, it presses, sticky, invisible. And in that interlude, I can't name the mood, confuse the burst of anticipation with joy, like waiting for a birth. Then the waiting names itself. When the strange red poppy begins to bloom its fear inside me, I refuse. I push back each petal to the hard, unbloomed green hat of the bud, the hat that women wear when their hair falls out. I will not let it open to its heart. I will not take this flower until the call comes, and I must take this flower. It is so nice to see you all here. One of the things I've loved about this day is that it's about poetry, not so much about particular poets. That's what we share, is this love for this thing we call a poem, these words. And I am so proud to share the podium with these amazing people. So I'm going to read just a few poems of my own and then close one with another from somebody else. I've gotten into writing narrative poems lately because I've had some things I've been trying to write for years and I've been putting them away, ducking them. And so I tried something new and I've been writing odd rhymed quatrains of all things. God help me. And so these have come out. So let me read you two. One of them is fairly long. Bear with me. Street Vendor, Vung Tao, 1969. Epigraph from Raymond Carver. Eating is a small, good thing in a time like this. We pick him partly because there's a little shade, partly because he meets our eyes without a beggar's look, and partly because he's handy, set up between two bars that serve the local beer called 33, of which we've drunk too many in both. Two boards across his cart make a table braced by 3 deep bamboo baskets crammed with produce, and a fourth one filled with fresh-baked bread, long brown baguettes. We order banh mi, the sandwich of the street. The boy is maybe 15, so thin he's lost in a short-sleeved white shirt too big for him, black cotton trousers belted tight, rubber sandals. His shirt has been mended by someone patient with a needle. Fine stitches, fixing a rip above the right pocket like my grandmother knows how to make. A little girl squats against the wall behind him, scribbling on a tablet with a pencil. Her pink tongue shows at the edge of her mouth. He pulls a baguette from the basket to his right, gracefully cuts it in half, then slices each piece with a homemade knife, the tip blunted like a sailor's rigging blade. It's said each vendor has a private recipe for banh mi, beginning with the base. This one starts with a sauce, garlic mixed with spices, a splash of soy, chopped chilies, basted on both faces of bread with a brush. From a jar, he takes out pickled cucumber, then thick leaves of lettuce, shredded carrot. He slices both red and green peppers into rings spread all along the length. In a few minutes, he will wrap the sandwiches in newsprint, stained with oil. We will pay him 4 times the price in piastres, all our loose change, and a couple of dollar bills, so that he will bow. "To keep my sister with the nuns," he'll say. We will step back into the random slap and jostle of the street, the dance of the sidewalk, ranks of parked Vespas and Hondas, the stalls with their stench of hot briquettes, marinated meats mingled with exhaust, piss and vomit in the doorways, from which we hear that time is on our side, how good it is to be a Nashville rebel in the Monaco, the Starlight, the U.S. Moon, or Olympia bars. We will wave at girls in short leather skirts, smile at a pair of shy twins in Audis, one peach-colored, one light blue. We are on leave from the war for the day, sailors in civvies who want to be normal. In just a few blocks, we will hear a sound like a full sea bag tumbling down a ship's ladder. A soldier in camis with one leg torqued on the bottom step of an outdoor staircase, the other flopped at a wrong angle on the sidewalk. A dark pool spreading beneath his gashed neck. On the landing above, an angry woman in a ripped silk blouse will be shouting in French. We'll drop our food on the street, kneel beside him. I will reach for a pulse, but get pushed aside by 2 off-duty corpsmen who will shake their heads. Nothing. There will be nothing. There will be nothing. We will catch the first jeep headed toward our ship, keep the story to ourselves. But here, right now, we know none of this. There is only a boy for whom the war means how to keep his little sister in school, make his clothes last, find enough clean water for family and garden and work for those slender hands that take a fat red tomato from a basket and slice it with a knife whose blade is sharp enough to cut away anything bad. The fierce pride in his eyes as he puts our money in a box, then wipes the board clean, the rich juices looking nothing like blood. I have a stopwatch. I started this poem in 1972. I got hurt in a motorcycle accident 3 days before returning to Vietnam, and spent some days in a hospital in Clark Air Force Base, and I tried to write about this experience, and I couldn't. And it's frustrated me ever since, and I realized I needed to grow up. I thought the poem was all about me, and it's not about me. And it took me a long time to grow up enough to know that. So it's a little long. Again, rhyme quatrains, although only the little ones inside. On Patmos, kneeling in the Panagia, we hear the sound of a woman's high-heeled shoes striking the stones of the floor, confident stride, strong hips, and I am back in a hospital bed at Clark Air Force Base, the Philippines, September 1969, hearing a pair of shoes tapping their way down the corridor outside my ward. I'd been knocked off a motorcycle by a drunk jeepney driver in Cavite City 5 days before. Left leg shattered, compound fractures, bone left on the street, flown to the surgeons at Clark who cleaned, debrided, sutured, and hung me up in traction. There were 3 of us in the ward. An Air Force guy had blown the fingers off his left hand with a homemade bomb. He'd been at Cameron Bay at a party on the beach. Stupid, he said. The other guy was Army, only 17. Right leg gone below the knee, left arm just above the elbow. Out on a routine patrol his first week in country, stood up to pee, and the other newbie, pulling first guard, shot him. He said we went through boot together. He spent his days with a model ship, awkward as it was to snap the pieces off and glue them into place one-handed. If I can do this, maybe I can put myself together again, he said. Each night after lights out, he cried for an hour, softly, into the snot on his pillow. The staff shrink was pissed I wouldn't say yes to amputation, said I was immature. By that time, I was hooked on Demerol, my butt cheeks already bared at the stroke of each third hour, ready for the needle. End of that week, late, they wheeled in 3 gurneys, jammed them tight against the walls, woke us up. One held an army captain, left leg just a stump. He was hyper, twitchy, talked a nurse into a telephone, called his wife. I'm fine, sweetheart, just fine, I'm coming home. Voice cracked. He didn't mention the leg. Second guy was nothing but plaster and gauze, both arms in casts, slits at eyes and mouth. He didn't move, didn't make a noise. Third man didn't have any sheets over him, only a gown, both legs gone, left arm missing nearly to the shoulder, rubber tubes in both nostrils, a pair of IV bags hung on posts from either side of the gurney. His mouth was open, eyes glazed. He made a sound like a pair of house slippers shuffling across a bare carpet. His catheter bag was half full. One of the volunteers came in the door just as the orderlies left. They were officers' wives for the most part, helping out while their husbands flew supply runs or medevacs, stabilized patients, wrote long, exacting reports. The war was far away, except for the wards. They fetched us decks of cards, looked for paperbacks, helped us fill out daily menus, poured out cups of water, let us flirt a bit, ignored our looks of lust. This one looked tired. She talked with the captain, who still seemed buzzed, his hands fluttering like bats. His stump thumped up and down as he talked. His top sheet was stained brown. He kept repeating, home, home, home. I heard her say the plane would load and leave real early. He should try to sleep. She put a hand on his forehead. He settled, closed his eyes. She moved on to the gauze man, but didn't do much more than stand. She reached a hand as though to touch, but stopped, adjusted the edge of a sheet, and turned away. She murmured something low to the third soldier, put her ear down near his face, and nodded. She took a cup of ice from a stand, carefully placed a chip between his lips, and let it melt. She did it twice more. Anything I can get you, soldier. Her voice was soft. He made a groan like a rusted nut coming loose from a bolt. Yeah, he said, I want some cake, a chocolate cake. She watched as water dribbled down his neck, said, what? He said it again. She shook her head. I'm sorry, she said, you can't eat. She tried to give him one more piece of ice. Lady, he said, cheeses. Lady, I don't want to eat it. I just want to look at it. He clamped his teeth down hard, grinding away at pain, turning his head to the wall. A minute more, she left the ward, gone for the night. Then it was another shot for me, lights out again, and sleep. They came before breakfast, the nurses, changing linen, IVs, a single bedpan. The same orderlies took the captain first. He waved at us when he left. Then they took the white ghost who never moved or spoke. That was when we heard the click of high heels out in the hall, and the volunteer walked in, dressed for a date, shimmering green gown, blonde hair hanging over bare shoulders. She was carrying a cake in 2 hands. A big, round, 3-layer cake, a single candle lit. She walked to the soldier's gurney and stopped. He heard her coming and turned to look. The froth of chocolate, same color as his skin. They didn't say a word. The orderlies returned. One checked the blood pressure in his remaining arm. One changed the flow on both IVs. The soldier raised the stump of his arm, let it down soft on the rumpled sheet. His nose and eyes were leaking. The orderlies released the gurney's brake and wheeled him out. She took a few steps back to let them pass. We saw her shoulders shake. She stayed like that a long, long time, then turned and left without saying anything. The candle had gone out, left a trail of smoke like a fighter jet leaves across a clear sky. The guy who blew off his own hand said she could have left some for us. But it was all right. We couldn't have eaten the smallest bite of that darkness. As here, on a Greek island, thousands of miles and more than 40 years away, I wait for the bread of the body, kneeling beside a woman who feeds me every day. One short love poem, because that was a dark poem. Next May, my wife and I will have been together 50 years. Anyone married to my wife would want to stay married to my wife. So, anniversary poem, Annas. You know what an Annas hummingbird is? They stay all year round up here. Annas for Sally. Abiding year around, says one field guide, no longer a migrator following the bright names of flowers south, hence the splotch of color in the front window, drawn by the orange vision of nasturtiums in a pot on the porch, checking each wilted blossom before turning to hover right up against the glass. It's 4 months since the last Rufus left for an easier life. The Annas is tougher, persevering through frost, snow, rain, and the gray-on-gray times. Very like you, I often think. Abiding, staying on, persistent, seeking out every splotch of color in the bleached, anemic days, as love enjoins, as strength demands, holding on through lean months for the good, waiting for light, bearing your own. Final poem. David Wagner is one of our great poets. And this is from an unpublished manuscript that I've just gotten and have been reading with great delight. The poem, I figure, is perfect for tonight. It's called Instructions for Arresting the Poets. There has been an outbreak of disorderly language in the heart of the city. And in order to restore order, we are ordering you to follow the following orders, which are to apprehend the poets, whose names, addresses, and numbers, naturally and normally associated with personal identity, are as unavailable as ever. So you must go directly to riverbanks, zoos, theaters' back rows, courtrooms, the city jails, junk shops, and bar stools, where you'll discover them, listening to noise, observing the invisible, pretending to manifest the ineffable, or worse, reading one word at a time, outdoors or in classrooms, presuming to teach the young to listen, as they do, not to what's obviously right, but the other right and left, and the other wrong, and to make up their own minds about what's left instead of the obvious. Thank you.
Our second poet laureate is Kathleen Flanagan. A little known fact is that Kathleen didn't start writing poems until she was 32 years old. And we're very glad that she has continued to write poems. So thank you so much.
It's so nice to be back at St. Martin's, which is a wonderful institution, such a generous institution. And I want to say thank you to Olympia Poetry Network for all that they do for poetry in this wonderful poetry community, and especially to Terry and Pat and Natalie, who've put so much into this event tonight. I'm going to read 2 poems, one shortish and one long. These are both poems from a new manuscript that I've put together, and this first poem is called 7 Seas. The one we fish to death, that tosses ships till they sink, so deep the fish at the fissures squiggle instead of swim, glow instead of gaze. The one inside a conch shell that sweeps us from the couch to its shore, our first metaphor. The sea of ones and zeros with tributaries pressing send, where our secrets glitter in the data gyre. The sea of refugees, turned away, turned away, turned away, crashing the razor wire fence. The sea of cash, thick with trawlers tangling nets, green with the drowned and drowning. The sea of regret that surges and retreats and sucks at our feet, a tide that takes us nowhere. And the final sea of liquid light we'll only know from below. This next poem is long, so just to warn you in advance. This is a poem that I was asked, actually was the four of us that are poets laureate, were asked, were asked to write something for an event, and in order to raise awareness for the work on relief services, humanitarian relief services by Catholic Relief Services. This is about a year ago by my friend Mona Leiden-Rochelle. So I didn't know how to do that. So I asked Mona to get me in contact with somebody who was working with Catholic Relief Services, and she got me in touch with a woman named Caroline Brennan, who is on the front lines of humanitarian relief. And she called me one afternoon, and it's a phone call that I will never forget as long as I live. And she just told me stories of what it was like to be in that situation with thousands of people who were displaced people, who were refugees, who were victims of war or a natural disaster. And so this is a poem in 10 parts. I'll take a little pause between sections. And I want to especially thank Sam Green, who has been really encouraging about this poem. It's one thing to write a poem for an event like that, but then it was really Sam who convinced me to keep working on it until it really felt like it was done for the page. So I really owe him a debt of gratitude. And this is dedicated to Caroline Brennan. My conversation with Caroline. Caroline says, refugees always tell me first about the home they had before, the one they ran from, that's gone now. We had 7 rooms and a terrace. Jasmine crowded our door. Our table had a view of the city, the river, an apricot tree. The sun shone in our windows early and woke us before the alarm. Caroline says, I look in the direction their words are pointing so they know I see it too. I tell them, it sounds beautiful, so they know I know this makeshift shelter built of cardboard or plastic sheets or bamboo is not their destiny. Their destiny has a roof and a copper pot steaming on the stove and a rose in a vase on a tray with cups of tea. Humiliation was the first Arabic word I learned, Caroline says. To run from their homes and schools and tree-lined boulevards, barber shops and cafes, the hospitals where their babies had been born, to walk in the heat and dust for days, for weeks, with blisters, crying, and a stream of grief. To ride the highways and stop at checkpoints where young boys pointed with their guns. To arrive en masse at a makeshift camp and fight to find a neck-high palm tree beside the road, providing a poor excuse for shade, and claim it. To make do for one night, wearing into how many more. Refugees can overcome, Caroline says, but to be unable to offer a visitor tea, it strips them down to nothing. It was Ramadan, Caroline says, and this mother was young, 26 or 27, with children popping in and out of her skirts and arms. She wanted so much to offer me something. She literally reached again and again for what wasn't there, a tray of coffee and cups, a figment I could picture just beyond her hands. We walked out into the sunlight to say goodbye, and she spotted a tiny yellow flower, the only growing thing I'd seen in camp that day. She plucked it up, saying, "Please take it, please. This is what it means to be Syrian." I grew up an army brat, Caroline says. We moved state to these snoozeville towns. My parents were tough and pulled themselves out of poverty. I felt a poverty of another kind. On 9/11, I watched all of it like a movie, all day, wanting to see and taste it, to be there, ash falling on my shoulders so I could understand. I'm drawn to people by their shades of gray when everything else has been taken, how desperate they are to be seen. Caroline says, I see them. I sometimes still dream of Afifa, Caroline says. She taught teachers in Afghanistan. Afifa wore the burqa, and I only knew her by her voice, which was hilarious, the voice of a comedian. We set out on foot one first day of school, passing men as we headed out alone. She and I were chatting together in our usual way when Afifa pulled back her burqa, and a woman appeared, entirely different than the one I knew, much older, gray, with worry lines. But I recognized that grin from her voice. She posed back against a tree like a model so I would take her picture on my phone. When I get anxious sometimes, I look at the picture and think of her, still in Afghanistan, say some Saturday night back in Chicago when I'm in line in a comedy club. You can't let the guilt get to you. I know Afifa would want me to enjoy the show. She'd go too, if she could. Caroline says, you would recognize the sound of chatter in the Iraqi camps, the call and response of mothers and children, family squabbles, grocery lists written in the air. But an eerie quiet settles on the Rohingya camps in Bangladesh. They've escaped, but brutality is a sickness that Rohingya can't shake. They live in perpetual limbo with no idea of what's to come. I interviewed one refugee whose answers were so brief and unadorned, it felt like a listless game of ping pong. She described running from their burning village and her sister forced to stop mid-escape to deliver her imminent child. And while she told this story, another woman nursed an infant, listening a little, but only a little. This was the very sister who birthed her baby on the road, in a makeshift delivery room with sky for a ceiling and tarps for walls, held up by her family to preserve what dignity they could. The only thing the sister would say was, shameful. At dusk, the Rohingya camps find an evening rhythm, Caroline says. The women and children retreat into bedtime, but the men linger until the beautiful call to prayer echoes from the makeshift mosque. Behind it, the low grind of tractors building roads for the thousands of new arrivals. Last June, it was a bamboo forest without interruption. By October, Caroline says, not a tree in sight. Clusters of bamboo huts and the quiet voices of mothers and fathers and grandparents and children. The smell of lentils cooking. Caroline says, in Haiti, after the earthquake, thousands of homeless took possession of a golf course, which became an endless camp in every direction, including time. At night, though, after meals and chores and putting down the children, a woman's voice rose out of the maze of the anonymous. A woman sang a lullaby to her babies, so beautiful and large, it became a lullaby for everyone who heard it. for the tens of thousands who ached for sleep and pleasant dreams, a twilight descant over the tent tops. Caroline says, I was walking in the heat through a new camp outside Mosul when Chris beside me heard his name called by his old interpreter from years ago. Now Petrus was a displaced person. Come see my wife, he invited from his short palm tree, and we sat down with his gathered family. They showed us videos on their cell phones of their home and escape, asking us please to tell the world. And while we listened, out came a tray of hot tea in glass cups. Where had this come from? Had it arrived from some previous still coherent life? Another family, probably, several palm trees over, who had seen the critical need for immediate hospitality. Steaming cups of tea with sugar in 110-degree heat in the non-existent shade. We were welcomed, Caroline says. Thank you. I just want to say how sweet it is to be with these four people. It's been a really wonderful day. Thank you so much for making this happen.
So our third poet laureate is Elizabeth Austin. And an interesting fact about Elizabeth is that she lived in Puerto Rico, where her father, a Navy pediatrician, was stationed for the first 3 years of her life. Thank you.
You know you succeeded in revealing something when a dear friend turns to you and says, I didn't know that. I still have secrets, Kathleen. It's such a delight to be here. Thank you so much to Pat and Terry and Natalie and the whole OPN board and the university for inviting us here, because it's really something to be together and to get to read with you. So thank you. I'm going to read one poem from my collection, Every Dress a Decision, and then I'm mostly going to read a number of poems from a manuscript in process. This is called The Permanent Fragility of Meaning. Why persist, scratching across the white field, row after row? Why repeat the ritual every morning, emptying my hands, asking for a new prayer to fold and unfold? Nothing changes. No one is saved. I walk into the day, hands still empty, and beg to be of use to someone. I lie down in the dark and beg to believe when the voice comes again with its commands, its promises. Unfold your hands. Revelation is not a fruit you pluck from trees. This is the work, cultivating the smallest shoot, readying your tongue to shape the sacred names, your mouth already filling. I lie down in the dark. I rise up and begin again. So the manuscript that I'm working on is called Calling Out the Names, and so I'm going to read you a series of poems from that. This first one is called Eve Walks the Highway at Dusk. I want to be visible, for my safety, yes, but also for yours. And so in my palm, I carry a small light and let it bump against my leg as my arms swing their small arcs in the dark. This is, I saw it being built along the margins of my gaze. Standstill freeway view, frayed tents, a trash pond inciting insects to riot. Misery unbottles itself in a man zagging down the shoulder. Sheets of plastic crinkle like a taunt. Here, over here. A broom is an instrument that sweeps instead of sings. A sweep is an instrument of civic dread. Nothing to see here. Behind locked doors, I daze into the margins. You're not stuck in traffic, you are traffic. What else have I pretended not to know? The citizen. One must have a mind of silly putty. Genuflect, not interrupt, combust at 35. One must have a mind of anecdote, not data point. She must never mind the grope. One must have a mind of antelope, must have a mind of wind, of pantyhose. One mustn't mind the mess or make a fuss, must heed the hive, repeat the lies, deciding's not for us. One must have her mind and fall in line and never tell, and never tell, and never tell. How to vote like a girl. Ladies, believe me when I say the buttonhole blooms possibility. Slip the round knob in the threaded slot like you mean it, like that mother of pearl is your inheritance. Did you gather your acre of fabric and sew like a mule, 8 miles an hour, 77 cents on the dollar the whole goddamn day? Yes, there will be blood in the selvage. Imagine yourself the heroine, your hand wielding the awl, you the one who makes the machine snarl. How to interrogate an archangel. Offer firewood. Strike up a flame. You won't get anything out of him while he's shivering. What you want is the statuesque gesture of confidence, the clarity derived from a place at the deity's right hand. Keep the coercion to a minimum when wrestling with a spiritually disheveled higher being. Your position can sour, leaving you with nothing but pine needles in your hands. Ask the most urgent questions first. Why are armies? And is it malignant? And who keeps tabs on the status of the platypus? Remember, information is secondary to your purpose. The voice matters most. That melody can repair all the torn pages. But first, you have to recognize what you've caught in your own human hands on an ordinary city street in the middle of March. Query. I am in two minds. One in which the world is full of strangers, and another in which the world is only you. Silence is the muscle I've let go slack. My solitude sends postcards, tiny canvases of fog and longing. I am in two minds. Estranged from your grace, the hours wear green, then cadmium. When I said, I don't know how to pray, was that you answering with an orchard, magpies, lichen scribed on branches? I watch the trees, the verb of their bodies answering weather, gestures of assent without surrender. Let me be in two minds, one with which to doubt, another to move among the leaves and wings. So tomorrow I'm teaching a workshop on titling poems, and you can imagine my concern as I chose what to read tonight, knowing that at least some of you, I think, will be in that tomorrow, and you might be listening thinking, what about that one? Revision. She brought a jam jar of double camellias, cut from a branch older than us both. I set the gift on my desk, a reminder of her steady, encouraging presence. Within a few hours, they show themselves, tiny sugar ants, the name I learned in childhood, each the length of a grain of rice, one or two at a time, hurrying as if resuming an interrupted errand. Across the silver base of my lamp, over the honey-colored wood at the desk's edge. One by one, I intercept them with a piece of paper, which each in turn boards like the delayed train they'd expected hours ago. Rides the page as I walk to the door and return each to the outside light. 7 times, and now again across this draft, one more. How many rode the pink skirts of this friendship offering, and what other lives have I overlooked, distracted by the familiar, anticipated beauties? So I have been very, very fortunate to work for more than 20 years at Seattle Children's Hospital. And for about 10 years now, I've been offering poetry and reflective writing workshops for the staff as part of their self-care and as a tool for conversation within care teams about how to stay connected to the heart of care. And so when I was asked by the hospital chaplain to write a poem for the annual memorial service at the hospital, I said yes, without quite knowing how that could be done. And I will say that one of the things that helped me to do that was that I had, over the course of the 2 years as the state's Poet Laureate, written poems for different occasions. And that was a muscle that I had been able to build in that role, and was grateful to feel that I at least had something to lean on in attempting to do that. So I'm just going to close with this poem that I wrote for that service. And it's titled, Calling Out the Names. Stripped of leaves, each limb exposed, maple remembers the whoosh of branches lush with wind and shade. Even frozen solid or emptied by drought, river remembers flood banks, the pulse of current. Grain in the loaf remembers field. Scar remembers knife, but also suture and the hand that bandaged. Bed recalls absent sleeper, damp breath on the pillow. Brush stilled on the dresser remembers knots and what followed the untangling. Honey remembers hive, bee, and blossom. Salmon tastes home in the scent of its birth stream. Sand remembers shell, gravel the granite cliff, lung, breath, throat, song, and I remember you. Thank you.
And our 4th Poet Laureate is Todd Marshall. Not everyone may know this, but Todd is an excellent soccer player, and his wife is also an equally excellent photographer.
Oh, yeah, not so much anymore, but I'm okay. So in our conversations today, and I think in a lot of the work we've heard tonight, the subject of welcome and hospitality and the opposite of those two gestures have come up again and again. And it's an energy that was on my mind a lot when I was traveling around the state. It's about 3 years passed since the arc of time leading up to the election that happened during my term, and questions of who was welcome and who's not welcome in our country were vigorously in the air. And so in gathering stuff to read and share, I went back to some things that I often read at those events in that fall of 2016, and they're not particularly pleasant, so I'll put that out, but there's going to be an arc toward things a little more pleasant. I love to share books at the different events, and I do little trivia questions all the time, and I think I gave away 50 or 60 copies of Timothy Snyder's On Tyranny, a great book that I would encourage you to look at. This is from another book of his called Bloodlands, the historian Timothy Snyder. Ita Stras, a young woman of 19, was pulled by Lithuanian policemen to a long pit in the Ponary forest. She had heard the firing of the guns and now could see the rows of corpses. This is the end, she thought, and what have I seen of life? She stood with others naked at the edge of the trench as the bullets flew past her head and body. She fell straight backward, not feigning death, simply from fright. She remained motionless as one body after another fell on top of her. When the pit was full, someone walked on top of the final layer of corpses, firing downward into the heap. A bullet passed through Ida's hand, but she made no sound. Earth was thrown over the pit. She waited for as long as she could, and then pushed her way through the bodies and dug through the soil. Without clothing, covered only in mud and in the blood of herself and others, she sought help. She visited one cottage and was turned away, and then a second where she was turned away, and then a third where she was turned away. In the fourth cottage, she found help, and she survived. Snyder continues in the next paragraph to ask, who lives in the fourth cottage? And I think that question was one that many of us were wrestling with in connection with the question of welcome. And that question sent me to this poem by Naomi Lazard called Ordinance on Arrival. Welcome to you who have managed to get here. It's been a terrible trip. You should be happy you have survived it. Statistics prove that not many do. You would like a bath, a hot meal, a good night's sleep. Some of you need medical attention. None of this is available. These things have always been in short supply. Now they are impossible to obtain. This is not a temporary situation. It is permanent. Our condolences on your disappointment. It is not our responsibility. Everything you have heard about this place is false. It is not our fault you have been deceived, ruined your health getting here. For reasons beyond our control, there is no vehicle out. And this third poem is by Myron Balajuski. It was translated from the Polish by Czesław Miłosz. It's called A Ballad of Going Down to the Store. First, I went down to the store by the stairs. Ah, imagine, by the stairs. Then people known and people unknown passed me by, and I passed them by. Regret that you did not see how people walk. Regret. I entered a complete store. Lamps of glass were burning. I saw somebody. He sat down, and what I heard, rustling of bags and human talk, and indeed, Indeed, I returned. Balajewski lived through the occupation of Warsaw and wrote this poem soon after that ended. Now, when all of us today have recounted how we went around the state and were wonderfully greeted and embraced and told stories of welcome, probably every one of us has a beautiful little sign like this that some kindergartner or first grader gave to us in a welcoming embrace. And I think that the rest of the poems that I'm going to share kind of show that energy, and I think show that spirit that I hope we're on an arc toward returning to, at least hope. This is a poem from The Tangled Line, which is my second book of poems, and it just blatantly plagiarizes. So, Loam. Love is peasant, love is find. It lends me. It is unlike toast, it is prow. It is ride, not self-seating, it is easy language, it keeps sandy loam close. Love does not spite, but rejoices chartreuse, celebrates brindle, cheers wildflower bloom. Love always process, always trout, always whistle and flute, always, always very dear. Three remain, grain, hap, and love. And the greatest of these, my brothers and sisters, is love. Always peasant, always prow, always sandy loam, and always, always near. This is a poem that borrows some from John Keats. There are a few swear words in it. It also refers to a president and rich pricks with shit-eating grins. But this was back in Reagan's day, so who knows? No nightingales in Kansas. Always on the dirt roads outside of El Dorado, my epileptic uncle drove too fast in winter. Fuck the sun, he'd say, pushing the speedometer to 70, cottonwoods blurring into mesmerizing spindles of streaky light. Screw the cops, the cold, and the wind, piss on the president and rich pricks with shit-eating grins. Fuck the moon, the bills, the deer, and the stars. And then he'd skid to a stop through gravelly sand and snow, and we'd smoke a bowl, and midnight would gather like a black hole beneath the pickup's cab. His head slumped against the driver's window, and for a few hours he'd sleep, a child returned to the drowsy numbness of a mother's hand, and I'd stare at him to augur why those wide plains and reckless stakes, why disco and Izod and Reagan, why speed equaled V8s floored and roaring and something to snort when the teacher looked away, why that shuttle couldn't at least have orbited for a few quiet hours, and why the weight of arrival always fell toward Wichita and the mazy cul-de-sacs of suburban streets, why 2112 and Ayn Rand are music loud and deep, and why I loved him falling stoned to sleep. And then we'd wake freezing, buried beneath 2 inches of newly fallen snow. Fuck the dawn, the ice, the clouds, piss on the sky and those bare trees. Fuck an A, a B, and a C, he'd say, as he spun out, gravel and ice pluming from rear tires, and tore down country roads, past dinosaur wells, ka-chunking, ka-chunking, mini clocks measuring consumption, divided by speed against the prime number, called horizon, called this spinning planet, called the weariness, the fever, and the fret. Past farmhouses where men lumbered through pre-dawn chores, women fixing omelets in kitchens lit by one bare bulb, cracked eggshells piled in the sink. And he'd slide to a stop, gotta take a freaking leak, and cows in the field would look at us, pissing yellow ribbons, spelling our names with cursive lines in the vast white, and he would run at them, waving wild arms, and I'd follow, climbing the barbed wire fence, kicking up drifts, hearts destined for the slaughterhouse, intent to scream, not like meat, but the blade. I should have pointed out a couple of the erudite allusions in that poem. I mentioned Rush's album 2112, there were obviously some lines from John Keats. Choir. But mud covers the angels, a perfect disguise for feathery wings. Try it. Smear yourself with sloppy handfuls, scoop dark clumps from puddles, paint your face and arms, drop globs on feet and toes, and slip into the streets, smile at everyone, and they'll ignore you as only the holy are ignored. A choice. Learn to fly, to lift your body by the strength of muscle and bone, or live with drying mud and a song, that familiar human singing, the refrain that ends in dirt, dirt, dirt. Now, a project that I had a lot of fun and into which I put a great deal of work was the Washington 129 anthology, and there are a number of, I like all the poems in it, obviously, but I thought I might share a few poems from it that bounce up against the welcome and unwelcome dynamic. This is by Jim Bertolino. It's called Dear Bigfoot. I'm sending you this message to deny that I am deceased. However, as the general consensus would have it, I may be, like you, extinct. What I was as an active younger man no longer exists. That life is gone. Now when I look into a thriving green-faced pond, I am comforted by both the microscopic and tangible life. When my eyes climb the slim, angled legs of the heron, then move from the point of its long beak to beautiful round eyes that do not hesitate to stare back at me, I bless that bird as it flaps its large, somewhat awkward wings. I am present in this world, and the world is present in me. My belief does not require that I fold my hands in prayer. I, too, am blessed. Mount Rainier by Vikram Madan. Mount Rainier, O mountain of joy, the sight of you makes our hearts skip. Your snow-capped visage, looming weighty and coy, keeps Puget Sound thralled in its grip. The reason you pep up our graying morale is one that can rarely be topped. Your sentinel stance, viewed across this locale, implies that the rain must have stopped. And if you don't know Vikram's art, he makes these amazing, playful Grim Reapers, and he's got all these great books of them. He has a web page, and they're just fantastic. Bold, Anastasia Renee Tolbert's poem, Bold. She says the mouse is domesticated because it comes out to eat when she is eating breakfast, sunny side up. Because it washes his hands and waits for her to say grace. Because it walks around each trap and avoids eating pellets. Because it knows when she is trying to kill it. Because it won't just die already like everyone else. Because it wants to live its life in her kitchen, like she's all bright yellow and sunshine. And then one last one from the anthology. Lost my page on it. This one is Communion by Anna Quinn. There are days when the only antidote to the crazy is a walk to the fish market, the one in the commercial boatyard, because you need the clamor and pound of things built, things painted and fixed. Your mouth asking for a pound of halibut. The fish guy in the black hoodie and red apron lifting the entire fish from the ice, placing it on the scarred butcher block, hacks off a good-sized chunk. The heft of that cleaver sets the fish silver side down on the scale, asks, 15 ounces okay? Yes, you say. He wraps it like a sacred thing in white paper. You count out 2 5s and 3 1s and carry the white package to your little tug and climb inside, fry it in butter, 2 garlic cloves, a bit of dill, pour yourself a mug of wine, and when you lift the first flaky white to your lips, you close your eyes, stick out your tongue, and say, Amen. Oh my God, amen. And then I thought I might finish with a poem from Bugle, birthday poem, although I feel kind of weird reading it. My mom's birthday's coming up in a week, and there are a few dates in it that are dated, but you guys can probably put that together. I'm not 42. No. Birthday poem. My mother turned 60 this week, deep in that stretch where anything can happen. Her mother died at 57. I'm 42, and Dante's Dark Forests, well, let's just say it continues to thicken. And I know what you spiritual people are thinking, muttering koans under your ginger tea breath. It can happen anytime, anywhere, to anyone, and that's why the moon doesn't cling as it slides across the sky. Fine. Last fall, hiking near Priest Lake, I came across a teenage boy covered with blood, sobbing. He held a compound bow with pulleys that looked like they could move the horizon, or at least hurl a razor-edged arrow a couple 100 feet through the breast and heart of a skinny doe, and out again into the shoulder of a 5-month fawn that still quivered. Cedar scales covered the forest floor, a mossy quilt to hush the pain. And so we pulled on the shaft, but it was stuck in bone, and the fawn muled, moaned, kicked thin legs, black hooves like chips of coal. I told the kid to find a big rock, quick. He did and held it toward me, somehow confused, and I tried to smash the skull, but missed once, shattering the eye socket and breaking the jaw, before ending the pain and walking away among massive trees that held the sound in the harsh ridges of bark. Jesus, Mom, I'd meant to write a happy birthday poem. When I'd gone 100 yards, the quiet beneath the looming cedars was the quiet I felt as a child in your arms. You were a little bit older than that kid. This is the best that I can do. Above the ancient grove, tamaracks lit the hillside in an explosive gold glowing toward dusk. Close your eyes. You can see them. Keep them closed. We'll all blow together and make a wish. Thank you.
So our fifth and current poet laureate is Claudia Castro Luna. Claudia has 3 kids and 5 chickens. One of her chickens is called Pablo after Pablo Neruda. And unfortunately, her family didn't let her name another one Muriel after Muriel Rukeyser. Thank you, Claudia.
I'll start with something mundane. I'm very glad that's what I sent in for what you don't know about me. I was sitting there thinking, what did I send in? I'm glad. I love Muriel Rukeyser, but my kids didn't like the name so much. What a day this has been. What an amazing day. Thank you so much to St. Martin's and the Olympia Poetry Network for making this happen. This is really historic. It's really amazing. And I hope that it could happen again when we have the next laureate, and there'll be 6 of us instead of 5. That's quite a tough act to follow. I'm a bit speechless after that last poem, Todd. Thank you. So what I have done in my travels across the state is I usually start my readings by sharing a poem written by a youth or a child, really. Teachers sometimes have sent me their, if I've been at a school, I'll get a heft of poems via email. So the entire class, sometimes teachers select a few, and I share those around. This was written through a different project, actually. This is one of Seattle Arts and Lectures project, written by Yareli Lopez Martinez at Evergreen High School. She was a 9th grader when she wrote this. She wrote it in Spanish, and I will read it first in Spanish, and then we'll read the English translation. Mi carga. Algunas memorias nunca se van de tus huesos. Como la sal del mar, se convierte parte de ti y lo cargas. My load. Some memories never leave your bones. Like the salt in the sea, they become part of you, and you carry them. It's an amazing little poem. So I thought I would start. I too have some poems, new work, sort of new work, newish work. But I wanted to start with this poem because in thinking just the questions, we all had access to the questions before we showed up today, the questions for the round table. And in talking to Sam at lunch, we were talking about how is it that you come about writing poetry? And we heard from Kathleen saying she came into it later, although that's still young to me, but and I am one of those persons who also came to poetry late. I think in part because I couldn't imagine myself as a Central American immigrant writing poems and doing literary work. And I didn't have a role model. I think if I had had one, perhaps things would have gone differently, or I would have started writing sooner. Anyhow, this poem, in a roundabout way, gets at that. Meditation at the reference desk. Today, I learned that the third stomach of a ruminating beast, aside from a masum, is also known as the book. I learned this from another book, a dictionary. 10 of them await prim and eager on a shelf above my desk, ready to fulfill my reference needs. There are dictionaries for every hour of the day, for every flower in the kingdom, for those seeking validation or clarification, for pesky and obedient words, and for exhausted terms like no more wars. 10 books is a paltry figure considering the 5,418 items that come up under dictionary in a local library search. To think that each word needs an arbiter of its meaning. Words are so unreliable, worse than shifty rats scouring city streets at night tabulating trash. Was ever there a time when a word meant everything, a pledge and the thing itself? I imagine an ancient butcher whose work was blood, but who spent his days and nights obsessed with the algorithmic frenzy of letters combining into words, and see him slashing a lumbering beast wide open and finding among the steaming entrails a bulky thing with folds resembling pages from an unwritten book. We see what we want to see. From an oil slick on concrete, someone may gather iridescent dragonfly wings. Someone else may see in a cow's digestive organ clean vellum awaiting ink from a quill. Perhaps all those cows pasturing at dawn with melancholy seeping upwards from bog to hoof to pupil know best. Know that some things, like love's not our own, are better left unwritten and unsaid. Feelings may not be trusted, and dictionaries even less. Besides, everything that has ever been said is embossed there, on the primordial plane wedged between omasum and heart. And even though humans don't have 4 stomachs, maybe my mother is onto something when she advises me to forget cross-references and to follow my gut. Which is eventually what it took for me to start trusting myself to write poems. So I wanted to, this time it has been interesting sharing poems. It has been interesting being the laureate under in this time that we're living in, partly because I come from El Salvador. I left El Salvador because of the Civil War in the 1980s, and I tell kids when I'm traveling, visiting schools, El Salvador was to the world what Syria is now. El Salvador was, if you were in Argentina, there would have been news of El Salvador. If you'd been in Japan, El Salvador would have been in the news in 1980s because of the war there. And so, of course, history has a way of repeating itself, and we see now Salvadorans again seeking asylum and fleeing El Salvador for what I believe is the tail end of that struggle that brought me here more than 30 years ago. So it's been interesting reading these poems because they've caught sort of autobiographical poems because they are catching like running things through a press, you know, Vandercook press. They catch something. The paper sometimes catches ink from the previous paper that has gone through, and that's how this feels a little bit to me. So this poem is called Tyranny of the Milky Way. And it talks about how one day I was a normal kid in El Salvador, and the next day there was war all around. Tyranny of the Milky Way. The way clouds taste as they go from castles to rabbits above your head. You are 12, your skin damped from the humid tropical day, the grass under your arms and legs benign, even if itchy. The way a million stars scatter at night, and you, in jersey gown and bare feet, seek the same spot from earlier in the day to count far away incandescent rocks, and tucked behind your ear, your secret wish to spot a single UFO. The way a slice of tres leches cake on your 13th birthday surrenders in unison on your tongue its sweet milks. The way at 12 you tasted marvel, and by 14 you tasted war. When I read this poem, I forgot to do this right now, I ask folks in the audience if they know what tres leches cake is or if they have ever had it. I don't know, would you indulge me? Show me if you've ever, how many of you know? Okay, so several of you know. So this is a very delicious cake that has 3 milks in it, and it's a white cake that just soaked with this deliciousness. And I was in TWISP at Liberty Bell Middle School, and I said, you will hear this word in this, you know, in this poem, tres leches cake. How many of you might have heard of this? This is a classroom where there were no Latino children in the class, which they would have known what tres leches cake is. Almost all of the hands went up, and I almost fell off backwards. You all have tasted tres leches cake? Yes, their Spanish teacher had him cook one in the school cafeteria, bake one in the school cafeteria. And so they all pretty much knew what it was. And it was just such a wonderful moment. Again, kudos to those teachers who go way beyond, right, to do things like that, to share things like that with their students. So I returned to El Salvador last December on an emergency because my father was very ill. My dad went back to El Salvador after living in the U.S. for about 15 years. He never, my parents were both teachers in El Salvador, and he never found his way here. And so he returned, became a teacher again, and retired there as a teacher. And so I wanted to read some poems about that trip to El Salvador and back, because for a moment there, I was straddling these two worlds. I was here, very embedded in the U.S. and in Washington State, and at the same time, just like a comet, just took off to go be with him because he had been very ill. So this poem, My Father's Garden, tells of what happened the first time I went to see my dad after he left El Salvador. He's a big gardener, and I take after him, not in my success in the garden, but in the attempt at doing something with plants and vegetables, and maybe even chickens. My father's garden. My father's garden bears no resemblance to the orderly paradises found in glossy magazines. There are no tidy borders to admire, no coordinating color palettes. Here, the eye is overtaken by a mass of unapologetic green, olive green, forest green, lemon green, green, and speckled among the verdure, calling attention to the resplendent selves are flowers in many hues and shapes. The mallows, my father's favorites, offer blooms as big as birds' nests. Petals glisten in midday sun, stretch far and wide. There's little modesty in their display. There is no coyness in this garden, only abundance and overflow. Zinnias grow by the dozen, roses burst yellow, salmon, red, bougainvilleas, trumpet flowers, a pulsing profusion, planted all with trembling hands. 20 years in exile is a long time to contemplate, each leaf a coming to terms with lost ideals, each flower a testament to fallen friends, each new seedling a last salute to persecutions of the heart. My father's garden is a nascent Eden, a rooting back to his native land. While I was sitting in my father's bedroom, he told me teachers were very involved in creating a consciousness for social change in El Salvador, and for that they paid dearly because many of them were assassinated during the war. And my dad told me of the people with whom he led the teachers' union, only 2 remained, himself and another gentleman. And he was telling me this because he felt himself very much at the end of the arch of his life, as he said it. And so passing on these stories to me. When I was growing up, my dad comes from a teeny town in El Salvador, 12 kilometers away from Guatemala. So there's a small border that only the locals know about between El Salvador and Guatemala. And when you stand on the corner of my dad's house, on the corner of the block, you could see the volcanoes in Guatemala. Guatemala is closer to us, my father's village, than San Salvador or other places. But a few things have not changed in all the years that I have been gone, which is over 30 years. And that is the bands of wild dogs that roam around. There's lots of, veterinary care is not as well procured as here. So there's lots of, probably cats too, but dogs are more visible. And so I was terrified of these dogs. It's not wild. They're not wild. They're homeless dogs. And when I was a kid, I was so afraid of them. And this time, maybe because I'm older, maybe because I was in a different frame of mind, they seem so tame and kind. I just had a very different engagement with these dogs. And so I wrote this poem from that. And in El Salvador, I talk about the slang dictionaries. I have 2 huge tomes of Salvadorian slang as part of my dictionaries above my desk. And aguacatero is the name that we give these dogs. Aguacate, of course, is the word for avocado. So you will see that showing up in the poem. Aguacatero, from the original Nahuatl, aguacuatl, derived into aguacate in Spanish, translated as avocado in English, trending now on Instagram, greening slices of hand-kneaded organic bread from London to LA, topping kale, shiitake, and brown rice bowls in Portland, filling sushi rolls all over the place. In El Salvador, avocados flourish everywhere, edging country roads, spilling their laden branches over adobe fences. Aguacatero refers to street dogs, the official title being Chucho Aguacatero. Chucho meaning dog, aguacatero meaning everywhere available, like the overripe fallen fruit they eat to stave off hunger. Aguacateros trot starve, birth, and die on the streets, eyes preternaturally dialed to plea. Tengo hambre, I am hungry, would you feed me? Tengo sed, I am thirsty, would you quench my thirst? Estoy enfermo, I am sick, my stomach, my sockets, my soul ache, would you cure me? I am itchy, would you exterminate legions of fleas and ticks gnawing my fur down to raw flesh? Aguacatero means of the horde. It signifies lowest common denominator, yet aguacateros are noble, resilient, clever. The word agua runs through them, blood runs through them, and fire, flame, and red, the desire to live and prosper. In that sense, aguacateros resemble their two-legged compatriots. Aguacatero also means plentiful, like the avocado trees lining roads, roads that await us all, roads we must choose from to survive. And this next poem has the title Buenos Días Le de Dios. And Buenos Días Le de Dios is a phrase that means, may God grant you a great day or a good day, something like that. And when I was little, living in Atiquizaya, which is a town of cobblestone streets with the volcanoes, Guatemalan volcanoes, turned blue. All around it is blue. You really get a sense of this blue planet that we inhabit, not because of the water, but because of the profusion of green that turns blue. That's what my grandmother said to people when she encountered them in the morning. Buenos días le de Dios. Buenos días le de Dios. Buenos días le de Dios. I was almost a college graduate when I came to understand here in the US that Buenos Días Le de Dios is not a word, but a phrase. Because I always heard it said so quickly, I thought it was a word, but in fact it's Buenos Días Le de Dios. That's 5 words. That's the title of the poem, and you will hear that here. Buenos Días Le de Dios. Roosters crow here, no matter noon or dawn, call and responds back and forth across yards. Sometimes a dog answers. A gust of wind sweeps and leaves quiver river. The bicyclist making his way up the road announces fresh bread with red horn mounted on rusty handlebars. He, navigating puddles and swerving stones while his crater-sized wicker basket harbors rolls, oven heat nestled yet in their cottony hearts. These are the sounds of happiness. The guava tree brushes shadows onto the old adobe wall, and a pair of doves coo to each other. Cuckoo-roo-cuckoo, cuckoo-roo-cuckoo, velvet songs of nothing rushed. Around the corner, an ancient wooden santo, for generations held by the same family, dispenses miracles year-round. El Niño Chiquito, the enigma of his face framed by the worn luster of his silver crown, his little body resigned every day to beaded satin and taffeta, stitched by local women, their hands swollen from washing clothes, from washing corn with lime, from grinding grain into masa, what will be tortillas by noon. In and out of needle, women darning life, the coming and going between. We love you, they tell the Virgin. We love you, they tell her son. We love you, they don't tell each other. They don't tell each other. Instead, they mean when they say, Buenos días, le de Dios. This is perhaps the last poem that I have written. Taking Todd's example of writing editorials for newspapers, I've written 2 editorials that have been accepted by the Seattle Times. The last one I wrote was regarding the children in the cages at the border. I realized as this was unfolding on television and the news coverage that my hands were having a really hard time peeling and cracking, and I was putting lotion on them, and I was puzzled this happens to my hands. This is not the first time it happened. It happened when I was a grad student. It happened all the time. So in times of heightened stress, I have this response, but I wasn't having particular stress. This was over the summer. I was going to take a break from the traveling around the state, so it was kind of strange to see this. And then I realized that it was the news of the children, because two of them, seven of the children that we know of have perished, have died. One of them was 16 years old. I was 14 when I came to the US. And when I heard that, I had a really difficult time just, I guess, holding the probabilities of life that this kid from El Salvador died under those circumstances and that I didn't. And here I am reading poems in front of you. So I recognized then that my hands were doing this because of that the stress of those children was, I was having a reaction, a PTSD reaction from that. And I wrote this op-ed. And this poem also then came out of the writing of the op-ed. This is why I think even an email counts as writing. So go to it, write every day. So, agua de beber. Agua de beber means like water to drink, and it's a term I use when I think of why can't things be as easy as water to drink? Agua de beber. Once there was a girl who lived in a country called Fear. There her fingers cracked and split into sharp mouths that screamed what she could not scream. Sometimes her hands itched and she scratched them viciously. With the scratching, pores swelled with water. At peak moments they burst, releasing the liquid within. The girl feared many things, but death most of all. Not her own, but that of her parents, through whom she saw and valued the world. That little girl is still around. She lives inside me, sneaking pistachio ice cream whenever she can. Now, when my hands begin to crack and split, I panic and recoil from the pain, and from the pain this caused the girl. Long ago, my hands learned to cry in my stead. The carved deltas at the tip of my fingers take me to ocean. Oh, how deep, how vast the great water, how it slushes inside my belly. Oh, how beautiful the world is to which I belong. And I'll read two more poems from Killing Marias to close. This one's called Maria Rosario, Clearest of Nights. How to make up with yourself after each self-breakup. How to cuddle under a broken wing the girl of you. Or how to explain that deep inside the sea, Sister Wind tries on her dress. Snails leave their homes when no one is looking. And birds sometimes are afraid to fly. Who is going to tell you what you only know? Whose fool will tell spider to spin less? It turns out that it is possible to mend the crevices inside yourself without silk threads and silver spoons. It is possible to tell the truth and not burn in hell, to win wars without shooting a rifle, and without a rifle to write a poem. And one last poem, but before I close, I wanted to say, we had, for those of you who were not here earlier in the day, we talked a lot about just our process of writing and also just what it means to be the State Poet Laureate. And I've had the chance during these 2 years to encounter poets across the United States. I've met Poets Laureate from other states. And in some occasions, I've sat quietly in the room as the discussion has gone on, feeling my well of gratitude fill even more, thinking just about the way the program has unfolded here in Washington State, how it has, it's like a river, right? It starts and each of us is contributing to the flow of this current. And just thinking about the way in which the process is held by Humanities Washington and Arts Washington, and just the people who have gone before the program, who have made it what it is. Because when we are, each of us has been alone, way out there on our own, right? I mean, we are with people, but we're really on our own. And so the program is what it is thanks to those organizations, but really due to the work of my colleagues. And so I've sat there in gratitude thinking how just lucky Washington State is that we have very rich poetry communities across the state, but that we have had people in the laureateship who've done such tremendous work. And as I come to the end of my term in January, I wish that very much so for the next person, that the next person occupying this position then will inherit this path that has been so well tended by all of you. So this last poem is titled Maria Santos' Sweetest Apple. And I titled these poems, the sweetest apple comes from, it's making a reference to the state of Washington. I give the names of this, the titles in this book are names of women who lived and who were killed, and accompanied by a poetic phrase of my own making, or sometimes a line from a Catholic prayer, the Litany of the Virgin Mary. And this sweetest apple makes reference to the apples grown in the state. Maria Santos' Sweetest Apple. They say we live on either side of a border. I say that's fodder for a sexist imagination. Coyote's tooth does not alone bite, and falcon's feather takes not alone to the sky. Silo living is not for living things, like the braid on my abuela's back and beads on a rosary strand. Interlinked, we are rain, dust, stars. Thank you.
Come on up. I'm just going to have them applaud all of you.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So, would you please give a huge heartfelt thank you for these 5 people that came all the way here?